So I wanted to do a video about caring for shade trees in your landscape. This is a very common sight here in front of me. This is a southern live oak, Quercus virginiana, that's planted in this probably 25 by 25 or 20 by 20 little island in the middle of this parking lot. We see this everywhere in Florida. This is woefully inadequate space for a tree like this, but it'll be good for a while. It'll be okay. But it's completely surrounded by pavement all the way around. Again, I would argue it's not the right tree for this spot, but it can grow successfully for at least a couple decades at least. It will grow in this spot. But so let's just say that this is a tree in your yard, and maybe you actually care about your tree and you want to take care of it, and you want it to grow up into a big shade tree that your grandchildren can sit under and swing from a rope on, Live oaks certainly are maybe the most planted tree in the landscape in Florida, certainly in Central Florida. But looking at this tree from here, it was probably planted less than 2 years ago. The age of the tree is kind of hard to say. I don't know, maybe 5-6 years old from an acorn, maybe more, maybe less. Sometimes the nurseries can make them grow fast with the right kind of fertilizer and stuff like that. But this is a really common sight to see trees about this size, about a 4-inch caliber tree, still tied up, pretty newly planted. This tree was probably a ball and burlap tree that was planted here, but it could have been out of a big 35-gallon pot. That's possible too, or a 30-gallon pot or something like that. But usually trees like this size are field dug trees, so they already have some challenges adopting to a new site. But in all essence, looking at this tree, it looks pretty good from here. It's early December here in Tampa, Florida. The trees, some yellowing of foliage and losing some leaves is all totally normal stuff to see live oaks do this time of year. But again, if this was my tree, what would I do to it? If this was my tree, I bought a house and this is the tree that I had, and I really cared about having a good tree long term, what would I do? So let's get in a little closer and take a look at what's going on with this tree. So there's a few things that I would look at immediately. One is the twigs. Like, what did the last year's growth look like? This is all wood from last year, from here to here. And looking around in the crown of this tree, I can see a lot of probably 12 inches of wood or so lay down, 12 inches of growth last year, which is good. That's not bad at all. It's a young, vigorous tree. I would expect that. The foliage size looks pretty good. The live oaks vary pretty significantly in the size of the foliage depending on the site and the genes, etc. So on this level, it's a real bushy young tree. It's been tipped and multiple times in the nursery to try to make a bushy tree, but it has a good shape overall that can go places long term. So the first thing I would do is look at the ground. If this was my tree, this is not enough mulch. A tree like this will thrive. If you really want to take care of your live oak, you need to have an area of mulch that's as big as this island right here, at least. For a tree this size, this whole area is mulched 4 inches thick with leaves and mulch, and you could plant other things there, but don't have grass. Have a heavy carbon-rich mulch that's leaves, wood chips, stuff like that is what these trees like. The grass, it'll grow, but it wants to have a slightly acidic, very fungal dominated soil. So the first thing I would do is I would add a lot more mulch. If this was my tree, I would mulch a big area, probably 20 by 20, under a tree this size. So that in itself is going to make a huge difference for the long-term health of this tree and how well it will establish. The second thing is, let's look at the base of the tree. I already see some problems here, at least from this level. Live oaks from a young age develop a strong trunk flare at the junction of the stem and the roots. So I want to see that root flare or its trunk flare always. I want to see it above the mulch. One thing also to note is that this tree is dropping a lot of acorns right now, which is good in the sense that it's got enough energy to make acorns, but sometimes that can be an indication of stress. But there's a good many acorns here, so I don't think the tree's too stressed yet. This is a young, really vigorous tree. So if we get in here close, let's look and see what's actually going on here, other than lots of fire ants. I see a lot of fire ants here. Here, let's see if we can get a lot of fire ants, which is not uncommon, nor is it an indication of, overtly an indication of a problem. But see if we can not get bit by fire ants. Look at all the fire ants. But, I've already gone down here several inches from where the mulch was, and I can't find, I'm not at the root stem junction. I'm down under the mulch, and I still have straight trunk going down into the soil. That's a problem. So a tree like this, let's see if we can get around the other side. Get under here, excuse me. Let's see if we can use this stick and find that root flare. Excuse me, accidentally stopped my video. Let's see if we can find that root flare. We're now down at least a couple inches, and I have no evidence yet of the root flare. Still down. So this tree's planted way too deep. If this was my tree, first thing I would do is I would get a shop vac and I would vacuum away all the soil, maybe 12 inches out from the trunk, and find where the flare actually comes out. If you found any girdling roots or large roots that were wrapped around above the flare, those should be cut. Depending on, not wholesale, there is some caveats to that, but man, this tree's planted way too deep. So this is super common too. Almost every one of these trees is planted too deep. So this is a ticking time bomb problem for a tree. If you want a tree to live a long time, you cannot do this. This will rot. This is not supposed to be under the ground. In nature, these trees have big root flares, and they never have this problem when they germinate in nature. Very, very rarely will you ever see this occur. So I can already see where this bark here is kind of squishy compared to everything else. So the first thing I would do is I would dig away all the soil and find where I can see those first order roots coming down. And once I found those roots, if there was any roots going over top of those first order buttress roots, I'd take them out, cut them out. As long as they are, pinky sized or less, even with a tree this size, take them out. Because what will happen is that they'll wrap up and around that first order buttress root, and that buttress root will keep growing, and you'll get a bad girdling root. Those things are very difficult to deal with later in a tree's life, but they're easy to deal with when the tree is young. So this tree is planted way too deep. So again, if this is my tree, I mulch it. I cover up all this grass, snuff it out, and put a bunch of mulch down, and I excavate the root crown and get this root crown up and out of the soil. Now, if it was buried, what I would do is if I found it 4 inches down, I would take that back and I would kind of taper some of this soil back away from that root crown. If the tree's down in a little bit of a hole, it's not the end of the world. Eventually, as it grows, that problem will become less over time. But certainly as the tree's establishing, and as you add additional mulch, keep that root flare exposed, or trunk flare, whatever you want to say. Some people get picky about the terminology there. But I would mulch and I would expose that trunk flare so I can see all my first order roots right where it starts to flare out. So that's 2 things that I would do to this tree. The next thing I can see here, and again, this is super common in newly planted trees. Look at that. God, that's awful. This tree is screaming to have that thing pulled off. And even in spite of that, you can see how much expansion has already occurred. That thing would snap if you cut it. And if I had my knife, I'd cut it right now. But this kind of thing, this tree support stakes, cause so many problems. So that would need to be cut right away. I mean, right away. That bulging in the trunk within probably 2 to 3 years would level itself out and you wouldn't notice it anymore. This is not a mortal issue for this tree right now. Now give it another few years, it may actually lay down tissue and bridge over that, and that become embedded and compartmentalized. But right now, I would absolutely remove that. This tree needs no support at all. So we would mulch, we'd expose the root flare, we'd get rid of that strangling strapping there. And then if we look inside the tree at the branch structure, you know, if I had enough room and I had a big open area, I probably wouldn't do much in the way of pruning on a tree like this. But if you look in here, you will see lots of little dead twigs all over the place. There's little twigs, you know, inside, like here. All this kind of stuff you can prune out. Is it going to make a massive difference in the health of the tree? But overall, most of these branch attachments they look pretty good. You know, some of these are pretty tight. Like this crotch right here is not perfect, but it's not awful. I wouldn't take that out if it were my tree. I wouldn't. This is the time when you can kind of get in here and take out some of these ones that are competing directly back at each other. But, you know, a tendency is to kind of strip out the inside of the tree. You want this tree to develop as many laterals as it can. Like they prune these trees in the nursery, they actually weight down the branches. So like you can see these branch attachments here, how they're kind of 90 degrees. They do that by design in the nursery. They select for those, and you can see like this one here. Live oaks don't generally do that on their own. This type of angle is more natural to their form. But there is some risk of an included bark scenario in this type of crotch here. But I wouldn't mess with it. What I would do is let this tree continue to grow, prune out all the stuff that was dead. I would come in here with a pair of pruners and I would prune out every little dead twig that has no leaves on it. This is the first thing I would do. And then I would find anything that's just, you could, some people say take out the stuff that's pointing down. I don't even know if that's really necessary. You could. Little pruning, like I wouldn't take anything out of this tree that's bigger than this size right here. Dead wood, or this would be the biggest size limb I would take out of this whole inside of this tree. But anything smaller than that you could take out without much consequence, as long as you're not taking out more than maybe 20% of the canopy. Let the tree be young and vigorous while it can be. So that's pretty much all I would do to this tree. I would lay down paper and I would put compost on it, very thin layer, and I would heap the mulch on here. I would expose that root flare and keep it exposed, cut that strapping, and I would clean up the inside of the canopy just so more light can get in there. A little bit more, not a ton. You want, the tree needs to have this bushy shape to be able to shade the bark to keep it going. So, you know, one of the things I want to see with a young tree like this is, let's see if I can find one, is good expansion joints in the cambium where it's laying down new tissue. We can see it here pretty easily if we look inside. This, see these light colored, see if I get the camera closer, sorry for the shaking. This light colored stuff here, that is new tissue that was laid down this year. I want to see a lot of that, but I can feel this is actually kind of soft almost here because all this sap is trying to get down to the back to the roots, but it can't. And I'm seeing all this expansion up here and less down here because of that strap. So you want to see good cambium expansion on a young tree. And a tree like this has a lot of potential to become a really long-lived tree. Even in this situation that it is now, with the root buried deep and with the strapping on it, this is not a condemned tree at all. This tree could be saved and rejuvenated and really made into an excellent tree. So if you have a tree like this in your landscape, it will, if you take care of it, particularly in its young stages, it goes a long way. And you know, you don't need to get crazy with the pruners. The biggest thing right now is you want to take care of this area on the ground level. I want to mulch, I want to expose the root flare, and I want to make sure that that tree can grow in an unrestricted state. If you didn't do any deadwood pruning, nothing at all, it doesn't even need that. But that would be maybe enhance its aesthetics a little bit. So, like I said, I just wanted to make this video because a lot of people have trees like this, and a lot of people leave it in this condition, and then 10 years later they have this crappy looking live oak that it's like it had to grow up. It's basically grown into its adulthood really atrophied compared to what it should be. So, and you just aren't going to get the longevity and the landscape value that you could get out of a tree like this. So check it out.